He wasn't the most famous lawman of the Old West, but he might have been the most feared. Dangerous Dan Tucker didn't need a flashy reputation or dime novel fame to strike terror into the hearts of outlaws. With a cold stare and a lightning draw, Tucker patrolled the wild frontier with deadly precision, often delivering justice faster than the courts ever could. His story is one of grit, gun smoke, and the kind of law and order that didn't leave room for second chances. If you love true tales from the American frontier, gritty lawmen, ruthless outlaws, and the untamed stories history almost forgot, hit that subscribe button and saddle up. There's a whole trail of Old West legends waiting just around the bend. Dan Tucker, better known by the nickname Dangerous Dan, remains a lesser-known figure among Old West lawmen. Born in Canada, he later became associated with the American frontier, where he developed a reputation as both a law officer and an enforcer of order in turbulent communities. Though not widely remembered today, Tucker played a notable role in law enforcement during a time when justice often came swiftly and without much formality. Arrival in New Mexico Territory and early career. He arrived in the New Mexico Territory in the early 1870s. Descriptions of him paint a picture of a quiet, reserved man with a slight accent, sometimes mistaken as Southern. His early years are difficult to verify in detail, but by 1875, he had reached Silver City after a period working near Fort Selden. Around this time, he crossed paths with Harvey Whitehill, the respected sheriff of Grant County. Though rumors followed Tucker, including speculation that he had left Colorado under uncertain circumstances, Whitehill took a liking to him and appointed him as a deputy. Tucker's early days in Silver City quickly brought him into contact with the town's more disruptive elements. One of his first notable encounters came in 1876 at Johnny Ward's dance hall. According to Wayne Whitehill, the sheriff's young son, who later recalled the event in a 1949 interview, a fight broke out between two men inside the establishment. After one of the men was injured, the other attempted to flee. As he ran through the streets, Tucker intervened publicly in a way that left a strong impression on onlookers, including young Wayne and others like Dan Rose, who was also a boy at the time. The following year, in 1877, another incident added to Tucker's growing mystique. Reports circulated that a man had been disrupting public order on a side street by throwing rocks at passersby. Tucker responded, followed at a distance by curious local boys who saw him as both mysterious and compelling. Eyewitnesses claimed that Tucker resolved the situation with characteristic swiftness and without exchanging words. Though the resolution resulted in the man's death, no legal consequences followed, highlighting the informal and discretionary nature of frontier justice. By 1878, Tucker had become well known throughout the region. In one case, he stopped a theft suspect who was attempting to escape. In another, he confronted several men believed to be involved in horse theft inside a Silver City saloon, leaving two of them incapacitated and one seriously injured. His responses to these situations, always firm and immediate, cemented his reputation. It was during this period that locals began referring to him as Dangerous Dan, not for wild behavior, but for the calm and efficient way he handled high-risk situations. Tucker's actions reflect a broader reality of law enforcement in the Old West. Lawmen operated with limited resources and broad discretion, especially in isolated towns where formal systems of justice were still developing. Involvement in the Salt War. In the latter part of 1877, Deputy Sheriff Dan Tucker was appointed captain of a privately assembled group of about 30 armed men from Silver City. These men, often described as mercenaries, were hired to support Charles Kerber, then serving as sheriff of El Paso County, Texas, in the conflict known as the Salt War. At the heart of the conflict were valuable salt deposits near the Guadalupe Mountains. Local mining companies, especially those involved in silver refining, wanted consistent and exclusive access to these deposits, which had long been considered a communal resource by the Mexican-American residents of the region. Tucker's company, which notably included figures such as the well-known outlaw John Kinney, joined forces with elements of the Texas Rangers and the U.S. Army. Their objective was to back Kerber and the Salt Ring, a political and economic faction favoring private control over the salt trade. Tensions came to a head in San Elizorio, where clashes occurred between the pro-salt ring forces and local residents aligned with the opposing anti-salt ring movement. During this period, several individuals identified as members of the opposition were reportedly killed, and many residents of the town, particularly of Mexican heritage, fled across the border into Mexico to avoid further conflict. Following a temporary deployment in Isleta, the group of hired men was officially disbanded. With the dissolution of the company, Tucker returned to his role as deputy sheriff, continuing his law enforcement career in more traditional civil capacities. Later incidents. In 1878, while continuing in his role as deputy sheriff, Dan Tucker also accepted the newly created position of town marshal for Silver City. He became the first person to officially hold this title, and he would go on to serve multiple terms. His appointment marked a turning point in local law enforcement as Silver City sought to formalize its response to rising tensions and disorder. According to later reports, Tucker quickly established a reputation for restoring order. He was respected for his firm and decisive methods, particularly in situations that others may have hesitated to confront. His approach made him both effective and, at times, intimidating to those who challenged the law. A significant incident occurred in November 1878, as recorded by the Grant County Herald. During an attempt to arrest a local cowboy named Caprio Rodriguez, following a disturbance at a saloon, Tucker was injured in a confrontation. Rodriguez, who resisted arrest, was fatally wounded during the encounter. The event further solidified Tucker's image as a no-nonsense lawman who carried out his duties regardless of the risks involved. In May 1880, Sheriff Harvey Whitehill sent Tucker on a mission to recover property that had been stolen from a local prospector's cabin. The theft involved a range of items, including goods and personal belongings. Tucker was away for 2 days before returning with the stolen items, along with the horses, saddles, and firearms that had been in the possession of the suspects. According to Tucker's report, he had located the individuals on a nearby ranch, and they had not survived the confrontation. The ranch owner reportedly handled their burial. Soon after, Tucker responded to a troubling domestic situation. A man had reportedly assaulted his wife and child, leaving both seriously injured. As Tucker entered the home to intervene, the man struck him and momentarily disarmed him. In the struggle that followed, Tucker managed to regain control of the situation. The man did not survive the incident. Operating with limited oversight and immediate consequences, lawmen of the era often found themselves making life-and-death decisions on their own. Tucker's record reflects the complex and often harsh realities of keeping order in the rapidly growing towns of the American West. In 1881, Dan Tucker continued working closely with Sheriff Harvey Whitehill, including assisting in the formal execution of 2 men, a duty he had carried out before in Grant County. His involvement in official executions reflected the limited legal infrastructure of frontier justice, where lawmen were often required to perform multiple roles, including that of hangman. Later that year, Tucker accepted the position of town marshal in Shakespeare, New Mexico, a lawless mining settlement known for frequent trouble with cattle thieves and transient outlaws. In September, he confronted rustler Jake Bond during an attempted arrest, resulting in Bond's death. This event contributed to Tucker's reputation as a figure who handled high-risk encounters directly and without delay. In November 1881, Tucker apprehended a known outlaw named Sandy King after a storekeeper had been seriously injured during an altercation. Around the same time, on November 9th, he also arrested Russian Bill Tattenbaum, who had been wanted for cattle theft. Both men were ultimately executed by the town's vigilance committee later that day, a reflection of the strong extra-legal currents still present in remote communities where formal justice systems had limited reach. Later that month, Tucker was dispatched to Deming, New Mexico, after reports of a group of outlaws disturbing the peace and exerting control over the town. He began conducting the street patrols while openly carrying a shotgun, signaling a direct approach to reestablishing public order. According to journalist C.M. Chase, who was in the area reporting on the arrival of the Southern Pacific Railroad, Tucker managed to end the disorder within 3 days, Several individuals were disarmed or removed from the area in confrontations that once again underlined Tucker's stern presence. By 1882, Tucker's reputation had extended beyond public service. James H. Cook, then manager of the W.S. Ranch, later recalled Tucker's role as a stagecoach guard, known as a shotgun rider, for Wells Fargo. According to Cook, Tucker had been present during multiple defensive incidents involving attempted robberies, reinforcing his image as both a protector of property and a reliable presence on hazardous routes. Tucker's activities during this period illustrate the overlapping responsibilities of frontier lawmen. They upheld the law, maintained public order, enforced justice, and at times worked in private security roles. His career remains a vivid example of how individuals shaped law enforcement in the Old West through personal initiative and force of character, often in the absence of structured legal support. The shooting caused controversy. In 1882, Dan Tucker found himself entangled in what would become the most debated incident of his career. On August 24th, James D. Burns, serving as a deputy in the mining settlement of Pascal, Grant County, entered the Walcott and Mills saloon. Burns had been drinking heavily and began behaving recklessly, drawing attention by spinning and displaying his pistol in an unsafe manner. Another deputy, Cornelius A. Mahoney, attempted to intervene and asked Burns to hand over his weapon. Burns refused, asserting his authority as a law officer and insisting that he had the right to remain armed. The town marshal, Claudius W. Moore, also confronted him and threatened to detain him if the behavior continued. Burns ignored both warnings and proceeded to visit other saloons, continuing his drinking and erratic conduct. By the following afternoon, having reportedly stayed up all night without rest, Burns made his way to the Sam Eckstein saloon. There he reportedly provoked Bob Kerr into an argument. When the situation escalated and Burns allegedly revealed his pistol, Kerr quickly exited the saloon to avoid further trouble. Burns then moved outside and walked down the street in front of the Centennial Saloon. Witnesses later said he began firing his weapon into the air, attracting widespread concern from townspeople. Despite these actions, he entered the Centennial Saloon and sat down at a gaming table with Frank Thurmond, a known professional gambler. Concerned citizens called for action, prompting Marshal Moore to arrive on the scene. Upon entering the saloon, he located Burns at the gaming table and asked him to step outside to speak privately. Burns refused, maintaining that he had done nothing wrong and would not leave until the card game had concluded. Marshal Moore repeated the request, but Burns continued to decline. In response, the marshal drew his sidearm and issued a final command for Burns to step outside. Also seated at the table during the standoff were former Deputy John W. Gilmo and Dan Tucker. The situation remained tense, with multiple witnesses present, and would soon evolve into a pivotal moment in Tucker's long career in law enforcement. John Gilmo encouraged Marshal Moore to put away his sidearm, hoping to de-escalate the situation. Moore complied, but almost immediately Burns sprang to his feet and reached for his own pistol. At that moment, Dan Tucker responded swiftly by drawing his weapon and firmly instructing Burns to disarm. Burns complied and handed over his firearm without further resistance. Marshal Moore then left the saloon to obtain an official warrant for Burns' arrest. After Moore's departure, tensions resurfaced. Burns began confronting Tucker verbally, expressing frustration and accusing him of unnecessarily inserting himself into the matter. A short time later, Moore returned with Deputy Bill McClellan. Holding the legal warrant, the two officers approached Burns and formally asked him to surrender his weapons, explaining that they had legal papers requiring his compliance. What happened next has remained unclear and subject to various accounts. According to most reports, Burns reacted unpredictably. He is said to have drawn his pistol and discharged a round, though it did not strike anyone. Despite both Moore and McClellan having their weapons drawn, it was Tucker who reacted first, reportedly firing and striking Burns in the side. The initial shots disrupted the lighting inside the saloon, extinguishing the lamps and plunging the room into darkness. In the confusion, both Moore and McClellan returned fire. Moore reportedly discharged 4 rounds in quick succession, while McClellan fired once. All of their shots struck Burns, who passed away on the spot. Although many viewed the response as justified based on the immediate threat, public reaction was complicated. Burns had been well liked by many miners in the area, and the local community called for accountability. As a result, charges were filed against both Moore and McClellan, more in response to public sentiment than clear legal grounds. Tucker, however, was not charged. On September 3, 1882, local officials made an attempt to take Moore and McClellan into custody, but both men declined to submit in Silver City. Rather than provoke further unrest, they traveled to Central City and voluntarily surrendered to law enforcement there, reportedly to avoid any risk of mob retaliation. Although Dan Tucker had initially been told he would not face charges, he was later arrested and detained in Central City alongside Moore. Deputy Bill McClellan was released on bail, but he tragically passed away before his case could go to trial. Following a night of heavy drinking, he was thrown from his horse and sustained fatal injuries. Tucker and Moore were eventually cleared of wrongdoing in the shooting incident. However, Moore was removed from his role as marshal. Although Tucker was legally exonerated, the episode left a lasting impact on his public image. Those who knew him personally remarked that he did not seem particularly troubled by the change in public perception. Not long after, Sheriff Whitehill lost his re-election bid. Tucker, who had served under him, was relieved of his duties by the incoming administration. Despite this, Tucker continued working as a shotgun messenger for Wells Fargo, a position that involved protecting valuable cargo on stagecoach routes. On December 14, 1882, while responding to a complaint at a brothel in Deming, New Mexico, Tucker walked into what turned out to be a premeditated setup. The complaint was unfounded, and as he entered the establishment, he was unexpectedly attacked and wounded in the shoulder. During the ensuing chaos, Tucker returned fire, resulting in the deaths of one man and one of the women reportedly involved in orchestrating the ambush. Two additional individuals, both women, were also believed to have participated. Other men nearby appeared ready to intervene, but quickly withdrew when several concerned townspeople arrived at the scene after hearing the disturbance. Gauge train robbery, later life, and disappearance. After recovering from his shoulder injury, Dan Tucker found that riding in stagecoaches caused him considerable discomfort. As a result, he took a new position as a special officer with the Southern Pacific Railroad. On November 24, 1883, Tucker led a posse in response to a serious train incident near Deming. A group of bandits had derailed a train near Gauge Station and committed robbery, resulting in the deaths of both the engineer and the railroad messenger. Tucker and his team pursued the suspects in the aftermath. That same month, Tucker apprehended York Kelly, a fugitive wanted for his involvement in a deadly bank robbery in Bisbee, Arizona. The incident had resulted in the loss of 4 lives, including that of a woman who was nearing childbirth. For a period after these events, Tucker stepped away from law enforcement and ran a saloon in Deming. However, in 1885, he returned to public service when he was appointed Deputy U.S. Marshal for the region. Later that year in November, Tucker and his friend William Graham encountered a group of Apache warriors roughly 11 miles west of Deming. A skirmish followed, and Tucker and Graham were able to push the group back without serious harm. By 1888, Tucker had resigned from his post and relocated to California. He made what is believed to be his final known visit to Grant County in 1892. After that, his trail goes cold. The circumstances of Tucker's later life and death remain uncertain. A newspaper article from 1931 reported that he had passed away in a hospital in San Bernardino, California. However, more recent historical research has not been able to confirm that account. Legacy Dan Tucker. Though not widely remembered today, Dan Tucker has drawn attention from some historians as one of the more capable and overlooked lawmen of the American frontier. Author Bob Alexander, in his biography Dangerous Dan Tucker, New Mexico's Deadly Lawman, argued that Tucker may have been more effective in his role than more famous figures such as Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp. This view was supported by respected historian Leon C. Metz, who also recognized Tucker's contributions to law enforcement during a turbulent period in the Southwest. Tucker was additionally profiled in Deadly Dozen, a book by Robert K. Diarmid, which highlighted 12 lesser-known but highly skilled frontier lawmen. Tucker was included as one of the most underrated figures of his kind. Dan Tucker's story may not be as famous as some of the Old West legends, but his impact as a fearless and determined lawman left an undeniable mark on frontier history. From Silver City to Deming, his tough but effective approach helped shape law enforcement in a wild and unpredictable era. If you're fascinated by the real stories behind the legends of the American Old West, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We dive deep into the lives of the frontier's most intriguing figures, uncovering the truths that history books often leave out. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey into the untamed past.